The situation between the U.S. and Venezuela has escalated. On November 24th, Washington officially recognized President Nicolas Maduro and his inner circle as members of a foreign terrorist organization. Daniil Diomin will tell us what's happening around this country.
More than 12.5 warships and 15,000 American soldiers are already in the Caribbean basin. The Pentagon is flexing its muscles, and Donald Trump is receiving the authority to strike Maduro's infrastructure, even though this is not explicitly stated in legal terms. Despite the escalation, polls show that 70% of Americans are against a military operation in Venezuela, and 76% believe that the position of the U.S. administration is unclear to them.
Venezuela is a country with the largest proven oil reserves in the world, even more than Saudi Arabia. That's the first thing. Second, Venezuela is essentially a foothold for China and Russia on the Latin American continent. Furthermore, Venezuela is threatening another country, Guyana, which is nearby and also produces oil. And by a strange coincidence, it is American companies that are extracting oil there.
Back in the spring, on April 9th, Maduro declared a state of economic emergency. He accused the United States of waging economic warfare and granted himself broad powers, ranging from suspending taxes to using state funds outside the budget. At that time, official Caracas was focused on survival, but just a few months later, the rhetoric changed.
So we know that our esteemed former president, Donald Trump, whenever the issue of oil arises in conversation, immediately has this almost automatic reflex, which is closely connected to the fact that the Americans have set themselves the goal of controlling as much energy in the world as possible, including first and foremost oil. And that is precisely why, of course, the situation we currently observe and witness around Venezuela immediately arises when quite suddenly it turns out that Venezuela is actually the largest supplier of illegal drugs to the United States and not, as many might have previously believed, neighboring Colombia.
On October 11th, Maduro announced the imminent attack by the United States in the Caribbean Sea and the largest deployment of American forces in 30 years. Aircraft carriers, submarines, F-35 jets, MQ-9 Reapers, Marines, and Special Forces. Venezuela is putting its army on full combat alert.
To fight drug trafficking, they first sent a fleet, 7 destroyers, 1 submarine, and destroyers armed with tomahawks. Maduro started to suspect that this was a bit much for just fighting drugs.
Against this backdrop, Caracas turns to its main partners. Maduro sent letters to Putin and Xi Jinping. He asked for defensive radars, fighter jet repairs, and even missiles. A Russian military Il-76 arrives in the country. Analysts note that Moscow is interested in preserving Maduro's regime, although its real capabilities are much more limited than before.
There he began mobilization, asking for help from Russia and China. They won't be able to help with anything. Venezuela actively supports Cuba, and Cuba is also a personal issue for Mr. Rubio in particular. So after Venezuela, according to this logic, the next will be Cuba, where most likely this communist regime, which is essentially sustained by Venezuela's support, will be overthrown because they supply them with oil and many other things.
On November 17th, the United States for the first time confirms its intention to designate the Cartel de los Soles as a terrorist organization. In Washington, this is explained as part of the fight against drug trafficking. But experts believe this is a way to remove legal obstacles and open the possibility for the use of force without having to appeal to Congress. At the same time, Donald Trump makes contradictory statements ranging from a willingness to negotiate with Maduro to talk of possible military intervention. Tensions continue, U.S. troops remain in the region, and Caracas seeks support from Moscow and Beijing. Meanwhile, official contacts between the countries are completely paralyzed. The region is experiencing its worst crisis in the past decade, and the further development of the situation remains unpredictable. Daniil Diomin, details, Inter-TV channel, Marathon, United News.
Hundreds of Americans took to the streets in downtown Washington to protest, outraged by the Trump administration's policies, not only regarding domestic issues, but also the recent proposal of a peace plan for Ukraine. They chanted slogans like, "You either stand with America or with Trump," and there were also signs saying, "Trump just sold out Ukraine." This was their reaction to the ultimatum demands made to Kyiv. They called the Thanksgiving deadline absurd. U.S. Senators Angus King and Jeanne Shaheen criticized the peace plan. They stated that in reality this is not an American initiative, but a Russian proposal. They even called it a wish list for the Russians. They assured that supposedly Secretary of State Marco Rubio himself explained it to them this way, but now Rubio denies this and claims that the peace proposal was developed in Washington as a solid basis for negotiations. It is based on proposals from the Russian side, but also on previous proposals from Ukraine. He has already written about this on the X network. The delegation appointed by President Volodymyr Zelensky has begun its work in Geneva to coordinate the peace plan. The head of the president's office, Andriy Yermak, has already held the first meeting with national security advisors from the leaders of the United Kingdom, France, and Germany. The next discussion will be with the United States delegation. Overall, a number of meetings in various formats are scheduled for today. President Volodymyr Zelensky welcomed the intensification of diplomacy and hopes for a positive outcome. He also expects that all participants will be constructive. It is necessary to stop the bloodshed and ensure that the war will not be reignited, Zelensky added. The peace plan for Ukraine is not a final proposal, US President Donald Trump told journalists. He assured that his goal is to achieve peace. He traditionally added that Russia's war against Ukraine would not have started if he had been president and that the United States is now trying to end it. When asked by journalists what would happen if President Zelensky does not agree to the terms of this plan, Trump replied that then he can keep fighting for as long as he wants. The coalition of the willing will gather for a video conference on November 25th to discuss the results of the talks in Switzerland and coordinate joint actions regarding Ukraine, French President Emmanuel Macron stated. European leaders issued a statement expressing their readiness to contribute to ensuring the sustainability of future peace in Ukraine. Borders must not be changed by force. According to the publication Bild, Europeans want to revise at least 4 points of Trump's peace plan. They disagree with the idea that Ukraine should cede Donbas and Crimea to Russia and with the reduction of the size of the Ukrainian army, since downsizing Ukraine's armed forces would make the country vulnerable to future attacks. Therefore, they propose to remove such restrictions. Also, during the meeting in Switzerland, they will insist that Ukraine regain control over the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and they propose that territorial discussions be considered after a ceasefire is established.